Shalom from Jerusalem. I'm Jonathan Hessen. This is TV7 Israel's daily update. And in today's edition, we will focus on two topics chiefly, namely, first and foremost, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi concluded a two-day state visit here to Israel. This is the second visit by the Indian Prime Minister since 2017 when he first arrived in Israel for a separate meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Since then, a lot of work has been done by both the Indian and Israeli governments to further bolster this alliance. Much is happening behind the scenes, and it culminated this time with a host of memorandums of understandings or MOUs between the two sides. We will discuss this at length. Also, today we mark the high-stakes negotiations between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States, which is meanwhile also gearing for a potential strike. What is happening in Geneva, Switzerland, where the United States delegation, headed of course by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, is taking place via Omani mediation. The Omani foreign minister there in the Swiss city is then passing those messages to the Iranian foreign minister, who heads his own delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran. On that and more, let's introduce now our guest for today, to include Mr. Amir Oren, our TV7 editor-at-large. It's good to see you, Amir. And also Major General in Reserve Gershon Cohen, who formerly served as Israel's Defense College's commander, as well as an Army Corps commander, and a long list of other senior positions. It's great to have both of you with me on today's update. Mr. Oren, I'd like to start with you. The Prime Minister of India came here to Israel, had a very good visit from what I hear from a number of Israeli practitioners, diplomats, as well as India experts. What can you tell us about that briefly?
So such visits are usually the culmination of the improvement in relations. They do not generate by themselves further developments, but because we are dealing with security, defense, and intelligence channels, most of that is still underwater. And the public events are important because they are symbolic. They show the hundreds of millions of Indians back home, as well as to the hundreds of millions of Arabs or Muslims in general in the Middle East, that the relationship between New Delhi and Jerusalem is indeed strong. And of course, there are ideological sorts of kinship between Modi's party, which is of course Hindu, you can say right-wing, and Netanyahu's Likud party. Of course, when the Congress party was in power in India, both under Nehru and under his daughter Indira Gandhi, they tended to be quote-unquote non-aligned, socialist, and they tended for practical reasons, because of political and parliamentary reasons in the UN mostly, they tended to side with Egypt and other Arab countries against Israel before Egypt signed peace with Israel. But of course, Pakistan is India's arch enemy. Pakistan is helping some of Israel's regional neighbors, not yet its peace partners. And there are terror groups acting against both countries. So there are fertile grounds for cooperation and for the Israeli defense industry to supply its products to India.
Thank you, Mr. Oren. Of course, we do need to take into account that the left party that you referred to, that used to be anti-Israel, was allied with the Muslim minority in India, a minority that is very large, I must say, roughly 204 million Muslims living in India today. The majority, of course, of Indians, roughly 1.2 billion, happen to be Hindu, and you still have several tens of millions of Christians. But nonetheless, when you really take everything into account, the complexities that have been raging on the India-Pakistan front have been a challenge for New Delhi, and Pakistan has received much support from Middle Eastern countries, to include the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, to include Turkey, to include Qatar, that have even supported the Pakistanis with weapons and munitions. During the last altercation, Israel, of course, stands ardently on the side of India in this context, and that is of great significance. Now, General Hakohen, I'd like to ask you specifically about the unique relationship between New Delhi and Jerusalem. Beyond the bilateral scope, we do hear both Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in particular, but also Modi established some references to a alliance, a partnership of strategic levels, which seeks to expand into a multilateral alliance or axis that will be able to withstand some type of Islamist crescent that is on the rise.
Actually, you are absolutely right. We are facing new trends in the Middle East, and that the essential meaning of that visit of Prime Minister Modi, because actually we must realize the importance of that cleavage of two axes. One guided by the Turks, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Pakistan, guided by the spirit of the Muslim Brotherhood, and the other new axis with India, Emirates, Israel, Cyprus, and Greece. And it is very important practically regarding the economical importance of the idea, the initiation of IMEC. It was initiated by President Biden and adapted closely by President Trump. The transportation route between India, Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel to Haifa, and then from Haifa Harbor to Greek and to Europe. Why it is so important right now? Because I really guess that in that visit, Prime Minister Modi declared commitment to the original initiation of Biden that this route will cross Jordan and Israel, directed to Greek, and now we are facing a challenge that the Turks trying to change that original planning, to take the route from Jordan to Syria, to Turkey, and then to Europe, to bypass Israel and Greece. That commitment to the original plan is very, very important right now, and it has a lot of influences upon the whole region.
This commitment is indeed very significant. I will point out that, as General Hakohen just mentioned, Turkey has been operating ardently in order to establish alternatives, to include the rehabilitation of the Hijazi Railroad from Turkey through Syria, then to Jordan, from there to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Up until today, the Saudis have yet to agree to the final leg in such a connector of a railroad. But the Jordanians, Syrians, and Turks have already signed a memorandum of understanding this past September to advance such a railroad, and the Turks have committed to the creation of roughly 30 kilometers in Syria. They do have an issue of funding, which of course is going to be helpful once all the sanctions transpire, or rather expire. in Syria proper. And then you have a second route going from Turkey through Iraq. The Iraqis are building a new port that is supposed to have multiple terminals to transport large quantities of goods and then overland to ship them into Turkey. All this is made in order to reach ultimately Europe. And just at the start of this month, I think it happened on February 5th, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has announced a interconnector, namely of data to transmit various data points from Saudi Arabia through Jordan into Syria, circumventing the IMEC into the port of Tartus, from there all the way into Europe. Of course, this has been taken note of by Israel, since the Saudis have somewhat shifted their inclinations with regard to the IMEC, albeit split within the Saudi courts. Some are supportive, others are less so. But we will continue to closely monitor the developments on this front. Now, Mr. Oren, I'd like to redirect our attention right now to a very important high-stake negotiation taking place, of course, in Geneva. I've spoken to multiple people that are either directly or indirectly involved in these negotiations. One word comes to mind, and that is skepticism.
You know, Jonathan, a few hours ago or a few hours ahead of this meeting, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was asked, is this really the last chance? And he made sure that his viewers and listeners understand the difference between last and latest. He said, well, this is the latest meeting scheduled right now, but not necessarily the last. I'm paraphrasing here. Of course, if the parties come out of the meeting and have a hopeless expression on both their faces and in their messages back home, yes, then all hope is lost. But as you mentioned, the Omanis are mediating, but they are not the only ones. Rafael Grossi, the leader of IAEA, is also there, because apparently the technicalities of inspection and verification of what the Iranians are willing to concede regarding the facilities, especially the uranium enriching facilities, this is very important. Going back to Rubio, he was asked how is it possible to reconcile the diametrically opposed demands of both sides. The Iranians say, we will never give up enrichment, and President Trump says enrichment must come down to zero. And what Rubio said was that there could be a process of gradualism, but also it is very important where not only how, but where the Iranians enrich uranium. If it is underground, obviously it is in order to make it invulnerable to bombing. If they do it overground, the way it is done in nuclear power stations around the world, then it could be fine, because it would reflect a real willingness to do it for peaceful purposes.
So, according to the Wall Street Journal, which cited American officials related to the negotiations, while the negotiations were taking place in Geneva, the report came out where it basically emphasized 5 points that the Americans are demanding, to include the destruction of 3 nuclear facilities that were utilized for not just enrichment, but also had some military dimensions to it, to include Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. All 3 were targeted by the Americans in Operation Midnight Hammer in last July. The second is for the Iranians to transport all of the more than 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium of up to or even more than 60%. This enriched uranium was stored in one of those facilities. It's still there. And for Iran to transfer this material, which has no civilian application to it whatsoever. There is only one dimension of medical science that does utilize those type of levels, but the Iranians don't have that level of technology, nor that level of science to deal with those things. So it's irrelevant and it's purely military from their perspective. So that is number two. Number three is an end to any type of sunset clause. There's not going to be a sunset clause, as was the case in 2015 when the Obama administration reached a deal for, they dubbed it the Joint Comprehensive, even though it wasn't very comprehensive, plan of action. Here specifically, there will be no sunset. It means that any agreement would be indefinite in any type of a framework. Number four is zero enrichment, as Mr. Oren just mentioned, which is very important because the Iranians say, no, we deserve to do so under the NPT, even though it's a mere interpretation of the NPT, since under Article 4 of the NPT, it does not mention enrichment as a right. But number five, the Americans would be willing to have nominal sanctions lifted, and once proven that the Iranians are actually fulfilling their obligations, more sanctions would be lifted over time. This is also another point the Iranians are unwilling to even discuss, considering the fact that they demand immediate and comprehensive sanctions relief, something the Americans cannot afford, quite frankly. So looking at all those aspects, the chances for a breakthrough are not very high. And General Hakohen, when we're looking also at the American measures, while they're speaking in Geneva, we see the USS Gerald R. Ford transiting from a port call at the Greek island of Crete, moving, expected to arrive tomorrow evening, to Haifa for port call. We are seeing that from Haifa, of course, it's roughly 2.5 days to reach into the Persian Gulf if it were to do so. It still falls within the time frame that President Trump has made with regard to a final decision, which he stated on the 19th of February, between 10 to 15 days, meaning 3 days from today would be that window between 3 to 8 days from today in which he would make that final decision and act upon it. What are we to take into calculation within all of this information laid out?
Yeah. What the Americans are doing already is an impressive power manifestation. And even if they will succeed to get something in negotiation by diplomatic effort and prevented themselves from using that power, that force, yet the manifestation of the power is increasingly something that nobody can ignore. And this is not the end of the story. Even if we will get an agreement in the negotiation, it will still be kept an open question whether the Iranians are really going to obey all that statement in the agreement. And actually, what we can explain about the policy and the logic of President Trump, that he's very flexible. He's keeping all the ways, all options open. And he's not really deciding something from the beginning to the end and going with it without thinking every day again about the circumstances. So therefore, everyone really under uncertainty. But my guess is that even if the Iranian will agree at the end to something that the Americans can accept, it will not really end the story, because the inspection of what's going on later will create a kind of a new dilemma for the Americans, and questions about whether the agreement is really fulfilled, and they will not be satisfied. They can be very disappointed. Therefore, it depends upon the circumstances that are emerging from what already happened until now, and nobody can really predict the final outcome right now.
Indeed. Well, Mr. Oren, I'd like to follow or continue in this line of questioning. The Iranian proxies are not discussed, and you spoke about Secretary Rubio's statements last night. He did mention also that the Iranians are unwilling to discuss the ballistic missile program and the Iranian proxies, which are a significant part. And he said that if the Iranians continue in their refusal to do so, it will turn out to be very bad for them. Once again, indicating that prospects for a negotiated solutions are slim. But nonetheless, it seems like the Iranian proxies themselves are skeptical about any breakthrough. And we hear, for instance, Hezbollah in Lebanon coming out and utilizing media outlets to state we will refrain from joining the fight in the event that there is a limited strike. So they're trying now to convince the Americans to maintain a limited strike. If it goes beyond a limited strike, that's a different story according to them. So what are we seeing here? Is this just a PR stunt or an influence op, as we call it, in order to try and convince the Americans to scale back from all-out attack that may then destabilize the regime to a point of no return?
So there are two dimensions to your question. The first has to do with the sequence, nuclear ballistic proxy. You're familiar with the saying in Hebrew, from the heavy to the light. And there is also the opposite, from the light to the heavy. The heavy issue here is the nuclear file. If there's agreement on the nuclear issue, the others will follow. But if there are only agreements on the proxies and the ballistic missiles and no agreement on the nuclear file, it's a waste of time. The other dimension, as you phrased it, has to do with the proxies. Now, each of these proxies has interests of their own, separate from what the Tehran masterminds want from it. Hezbollah has to survive in the Lebanese environment. Now, this is the second deployment of the USS Ford. The first one, of course, was in October of 2023, when it was sent specifically in order to deter both Hezbollah and Iran from taking part in the war between Israel and Hamas. And to some extent, it has succeeded because Hezbollah, again, out of its other interests too, kept down its involvement to firing from across the border rather than trying to invade. So a symbolic or a token measure is possible on all sides.
Thank you, Mr. Owen. General Cohen, Israel is looking across the borders. It does see the various proxies that will undoubtedly bring it into the war, since the Americans have yet to decide whether or not they want to go at Iran just by themselves or have Israel join it. What can you tell us about that?
Hezbollah are preparing themselves to react against Israel, even if they will not get direct order or request from Iran to do that. They are ready, not in the same scale that they could attack Israel before 7th of October, but they have capabilities, and they are aware that if they will do that, it will be an opportunity to Israel to attack them more, even to bring them to a greater disaster than what they already suffered at the end of 2024. But all options are probable, and IDF is really ready for that. The same about the Houthi, it is a different threat, but they can act against Israel even without direct support by the Iranian. They are doing that from their own original ideology, and they are quite satisfied from their achievements. So we will have just to see what will happen, and therefore IDF with all forces, maybe Air Force, air defense, are ready to all scenarios.
Indeed, and not just that, of course, the intelligence community is hard at work, both defensively as well as offensively, as well as other branches of Israel's defense establishment. I know there are many in Lebanon, particularly affiliated to the state of Lebanon, that would like to see Israel degrade Hezbollah further, and would not hesitate to mention also that if Hezbollah miscalculates here, they would like to see Israel diminish it to the point where domestically it becomes irrelevant. Time will tell, of course, how this will evolve. But with that, I'd like to thank General Hakohen and Mr. Oren for all of your valuable insights today. And I'd like to thank you at home as well. Until our next edition. From here in Jerusalem, Shalom.
My name is Eran Lerman. I used to be Deputy National Security Advisor to the Government of Israel, currently Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, a think tank, and the editor of the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune. For the last few years, I've been a regular panelist for TV7, a fantastic opportunity to bring deep and analytical perspectives to the debate over regional affairs, Israeli affairs, international affairs, in the company of some of the best minds in Israel.
Israel has launched operations
on Vladimir Putin.
helping Iran develop. We have logic, we have rationale, we understand how the system operates.